See that? What does it say? In God we trust? Yeah, but which God do we fear, love, and trust? That's what we're talking about today as we start a new sermon series this week called The Standard. And we are looking at the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments are kind of the standard bearer for the Christian faith. And the 10 Commandments are something that I absolutely love, and they one of the things that kind of changed me in my faith as I was growing up. I think we usually look at the 10 Commandments as a checklist in order to get good with the big guy. All I need to do is get a 60% to get in. Really? All you think is you need a D? That's right. 60% is a D, a passing grade, and I can pass right through those pearly gates. All right. I think we kind of judge our Christianity and our worthiness on how well we can do those. And it's like, oh, at least I have most of them. Get a D and I pass and get in, apparently, right? And we can get in past the pearly gates and everything is wonderful. But that is a struggle that I think ends up hindering us in the long run. It actually hinders us rather than giving us freedom. And God is all about freeing us from all that would hold us down. So let's start off this first week with the first commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. And also we're kind of wrapping in, don't make any idols or anything like that. We kind of wrap those in together with this one. And before we kind of get into that one commandment, there's two things that you really should know about the 10 commandments. It's kind of like Lord of the Rings. The first commandment is the one commandment to rule them all. And we see that when we break the other commandments, we're actually going back and breaking the first one as well. And I know you're like, what? What do you mean we're breaking the first one when we break, don't commit adultery or something like that? Like, Why are we breaking that? You'll see as we get to it. But it's the one commandment to rule them all. And then the second thing I want you to see is how the commandments are grouped together. The first grouping of commandments is all about your relationship to you and God. And the second grouping, the rest of the commandments, are about your relationship to you and your neighbor. And we can see this about how important this first commandment is and that grouping and how old it is, because at one point in the Gospels, Jesus was asked, hey, what's the most important commandment, Jesus? And Jesus said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And he said the second is just like it, love your neighbor as yourself. It's that same grouping there, but Jesus puts a lot of prominence on this. Don't have any other gods. This is the greatest commandment. And generally, I think it's like, if there's one that we got, like, yeah, I believe God is there. I don't believe in any other gods. I don't believe in the sun god Ra. I'm not Egyptian anymore. But Luther says something interesting in his small catechism. And that's this book right here. Luther's small catechism puts it that how we define another God, it's whatever that we are putting our fear, love, and trust in above everything else. That's how he defines another God. So the question is, what are we putting ahead of God? What are we fear, loving, and trusting in that's over and above God? I think we have a handle on all of this, but I'm not sure we do. And I actually have a good example of that. I thought I had a handle on all of this, and then I recently realized, in the last few months, realized how many other gods I had in my life and how they were ripped away from me last March. What do you mean we can't gather as a church where we are limited to just 10 people at a time? What do you mean we can't gather? Gathering is what a church does. What do you mean? If we can't worship together, how in the world will we be able to survive? If we have to close for a few weeks, will anyone come back? Will this just be like a gym membership where you don't come for a little bit and it's just done? It's just donuts as far as the eye can see. And what about donations? How will we run the budget if no one can come in here and donate money? I was out of my comfort zone. I didn't know what to do there for a little bit, and I was really challenged in where my fear, love, and trust really was. I feared that I was going to be irrelevant. I loved that we were doing church, and I trusted in my own ability to be able to rally some manner of crowd. And it kind of showed me that perhaps, yeah, we come together in this place to worship God, but everything else in how we get here, maybe I fear, loved, and trusted in other things in order to get us to this all place where we could worship God. That it was almost like I was serving other gods in order to even get to the one where we could worship the one true God. What do you fear, love, and trust that isn't God? Or let me put it another way. What is being ripped away from you right now that you don't know how you're going to survive without it? And that you fear, love, and trust that thing, and you know how that's going to get you by better than anything else. You know, is it your job? Is it your family? Is it your influence? Is it your intelligence? What is it? You see, oftentimes these gods are good things, but the problem is our heart turns them into ultimate things. Like look at money, for instance. Money is the easiest one to pick on because money is great. Like we can do all kinds of good things with money. We can buy, money is inherently like a good thing, right? Like we can buy amazing stuff with money. We can buy fruity pebbles with money. We can go on a date night with our spouse. We can buy football tickets. We can buy all these great things with money. We can do amazing things with it. But we also know that money has some severe pitfalls in it, right? Where we can become greedy and hurt, and we begin to fear, love, and trust in these different things. One of the ways that I see this, and it always breaks my heart a little bit whenever I see this, is when people will face tragedy in their lives, and they'll look at me and they'll go, I don't know why I'm facing this. I guess all that giving and all that attending church, it was all just for nothing. And they don't say it quite like that. I'm dumbing it down, but they say things like that, and it breaks my heart because in that moment, at least, their fear, love, and trust was this transaction that they had with God, that they feared, loved, and trust their faithfulness. And that means they're fear, loving, and trusting the mammon, the power, and we're trying to have power over God himself, and by kind of making ourselves into a God in our own power and our own ability to do that. So what is it that you fear, love, and trust? And so this reminds me of the story about David and Goliath. It's a spectacular story where the Philistines are really harassing the Israelites, and they're kind of at a stalemate in between this one valley. We're in South Florida. This is as much valley as it gets. I guess I could have found somewhere that has water in it. But the Philistines send out this mercenary Goliath, who's this massive guy who has this thick armor, and he's strong and very foreboding. And they work out an agreement. They're like, whoever can win a battle of hand-to-hand combat with Goliath will win, right? Like we'll be able to win the entire battle. And the Israelites are cowering in fear, scared to confront Goliath, because they look at him and they're like, oh man, we have to match power for power if we're going to win this battle. And so they look at him and they go, we got to match his height. We got to match his strength. We got to match his armor. We got to match his spear, match his other weapons, his muscles, and all that stuff. We got to match it all, and we can't. And they end up making their salvation has to be matching the thing that they're up against. And I think we do this all the time. When we come down with those diagnoses of cancer or some other life-threatening disease, and we instantly feel like we have to match the severity of the diagnosis, where we go into overdrive, throw patients out the window, and we're like, we got to get on something, where we start scouring the web for some kind of weird medicine that may be able to heal and save this person, or get on to this one experimental drug that they're just coming out with. We can get on that drug trial and we can finally find salvation in this drug. I mean, when the pandemic hit, like what do we fear, loving, and trusting in the pandemic? Like there's some people that are just so scared to get out of their homes, while other people are just walking around willy-nilly, walking around without any regard for their neighbor whatsoever. There's nuance in these things. But what are you fear, love, and trusting? You know, all of our kids are going back to school right now, and the school systems it's all just a big mess. But we look at school and a system as like a way of finding salvation for our students, or for our kids. It's like if we just do it the right way, or do it this way or that way with thinking about this, then finally we'll be able to see salvation for these kids in it. We put our fear, love, and trust in that. I think we see it's like we need to match evil for evil, match the power of whatever is holding us back. That is how we are going to overcome all of this. And we begin to fear, love, and trust that power, that mammon, to be able to overcome. And that becomes our God. And I think that's what Luther's talking about when he talks about mammon. What do you fear, love, and trust in? I think Paul, when he was writing the letter to the Philippians, he kind of helps us out with this. And we see this from Philippians chapter 3, beginning with the 18th verse. He says, "For many of whom I have often told you, and now tell you even with tears, walk as enemies of the cross of Christ." Walk as enemies of the cross of Christ. What is an enemy of the cross of Christ? Well, let's see what he's talking about. Let's continue on. "Their end is their destruction. Their God is their belly, and they glory in their shame, with minds set on earthly things." Like he says that everything that they want just ends, ends in destruction and chaos, right? And then he says their God is their belly. Like just, that sounds like if I just want something right away, I can just get it right away. It's not about saving up, or it's all about just taking everything that you want right now. And they glory in their shame, that their detestable acts, they see it as glory. That stuff that's like worshiping power, and it's that whole idea of mammon that we've been talking about. And they only thinking about temporal, earthly things. They're only thinking about the stuff in front of them. That they don't see any value in the lowly things of life. And then he goes this, "But our citizenship is in heaven, and from it we wait a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will transform our lowly body to be subject to his glorious body, by the power that enables him even to subject all things to himself." So he says we're not at war or against the cross, that we take it on, that we see Jesus went to the cross in a sense of lowliness, and we follow him to the cross in that sense of lowliness, and he takes care of us. That's a hopeful statement, and we see hope flowing from that the God is not that God isn't wanting us to try to ascend to his level, but to see how he comes down to us and is in our struggle. That's the cross. And we see a God that comes down to us is one that we can have fear, love, and hope in. Fear, love, and trust, I guess. And we can have hope in that. So thinking back to the story about David and Goliath, I think a lot of times when we look at that story, we make ourselves into David. Which is always a little weird, because like David's the hero of the story, and I think we're always trying to be the heroes of everything. It's like bask in my glory. I think we end up trusting ourselves, and that we can overcome all of this. And yeah, sure, we pray that to God to give us strength for all those things, but at the end of the day, we end up fear loving and trusting ourselves to get us through it. But here's the surprising thing about that story. That we're not David. We're the fearful Israelites up on the hill, cowering behind their tents, hoping they don't get chosen to die before Goliath, to get sacrificed before that God, right? That's who we are. But David's victory, when he slays the giant, becomes their victory. And what's beautiful about the story of David and Goliath is that David looks so small and inconsequential. They try to put their power, their faith, and trust on him, give him big swords, give him big armor, all that stuff. But he chooses all these small things. He's just a small, inconsequential boy, and they find salvation in that. just as Jesus comes and he falls to the Roman governments, the Goliaths of the day, it looks like he's inconsequential and dying and rising again. And we can have victory in him. And it's not in the powers of the world, but he is holding us in the victory of the creator of the universe. And Paul promises that he will transform us. And that's something that we can put our fear, love, and trust into. That we know that God is watching over us always. And this is something that I was reminded of again. And I usually have to be reminded of it all the time because I'm dense up here. But as things were ripped away from me, as we lost in-person worship, as we were building a building and needing to fundraise and all of a sudden the stock market crashes and all that stuff, and as things were shutting down all around, and I worried about what the future would look like. As we've gotten 6 months away and the future still doesn't seem certain, I doubt it ever will. But I realized that we're fine. That Jesus is still here, that Jesus is still loving each and every one of us, that Jesus is still watching over his church, even if it looks different today than it used to. He is continuing to lead and guide us and take us into places that we never thought that we would go again. A camera, right? And because of that, now we don't have to win the day. We can take that pressure off of us because he's already won the day. We can have freedom now that we don't have to just conquer and defeat all the Goliaths around us, that we can rest and go to the cross of Jesus and find our salvation there rather than having to defeat the Goliaths all around us. The Goliaths of our sickness, the Goliaths of our insecurities, our work, our family. We don't have to defeat all of those because we know that our God will always be with us, even when disaster strikes. And we know we'll always have a place with him, even if that place may be uncomfortable for just a little bit. And because we know that Jesus has won, we are free to fear, love, and trust in him above all things. He frees us. He frees us so much. And I'm moving into this language of freedom, and we're going to talk about it more next week. But what I think is interesting, the way the book of Deuteronomy brings out the 10 Commandments, it writes them down in the context of you once were slaves, but now you are free. And we end up finding out that whenever we try to put ourselves as God in any of these instances, we end up, or serving gods around us and serving these other gods, they end up putting us in subjugation underneath them. And God is offering us true freedom and saying there's freedom found here. And if we struggle even with that freedom, he still is coming and freeing us from all that holds us down. He brings us freedom. So here's what all that means. You know, earlier we talked about how there are good things and bad things, right? There's good things, but many times we make them ultimate things. Well, that drug trial, when you get cancer or when your family gets cancer, you know, that drug trial is a good thing, but many times we seek salvation in that drug trial that we got to get on it. But because we've been freed, we don't have to see salvation in it. But instead, we get to enjoy the advances and breakthroughs that happen in medicine. And we're free to work. It's a good thing, you know? And we don't have to work to discover who we are or discover who we are by what we do. But instead, we can work to provide a product or service which blesses our neighbors around us. It brings us freedom. And we talked about church and how we view attendance become this ultimate thing where we do it to try to put power over God. So we're free to attend church now, however it looks, whether it's through screens or in person or you're just listening to it, however you're doing it now. We're free to do all that because God has come to us. We don't have to check off some box to make sure that we do our penance before God for the day, right? But instead, we can come to Him in our worship services and place our hindrances and our struggles onto Him. And we can have, even if it's just a short amount of time in the week, a time of sanctuary and rest from all that holds us down to bring us freedom. And it's election season, so you know I've got to talk about this, but we are free to vote, not thinking that a certain candidate is going to be the only one that can save us. That's Messiah language, that's God language there. But we are free to vote because in that we can be good citizens and vote for things for the sake of our neighbors. The Ten Commandments are about freeing us and seeing that even when we fall in the pitfalls, God is still pulling us out by the power and love of His cross and resurrection. It's good news. We have a good God to trust Him, that we can fear, love, and trust in Him, knowing that He is for us and that He is with us, and He will never let us go. And I think that's good news. You guys have a great week.